The church fell silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence you want at a wedding. This was the kind that made 300 people hold their breath and grip their phones tighter. Jasmine stood at the altar in her mother's vintage lace gown, her hands shaking as Marcus reached for her ring finger. But instead of sliding the band into place, he yanked it off so hard she gasped. Before she could speak, he grabbed the microphone. The feedback screamed through the sanctuary. "I can't do this," Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I don't love you, Jasmine. I never did." Phones rose like a wave. Cameras turned. Jasmine's world shattered in high definition. But at the back of the church, someone else was watching. A man in a black suit, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that had been tracking every moment. Korean, calm, focused. When Marcus dropped the microphone and walked away, Jasmine ran after him. She made it 3 steps before a firm hand closed around her wrist. "Don't," the stranger said quietly. "Don't chase him." And that's when everything changed. Before we get into this story, do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe, because of what happened next, nobody saw it coming. The wedding was supposed to be perfect, but perfection has a way of crumbling when built on lies. Jasmine had been awake since 4 in the morning. Her bridesmaids had arrived at dawn, armed with champagne and excitement and enough makeup to transform her into someone who looked like they belonged in a magazine. Her mother had cried twice already. Her father had paced the bridal suite so many times he wore a path in the carpet. Everything was exactly as she had planned it, down to the flowers, the music, the way the afternoon light would pour through the stained glass windows at exactly 3:15. She walked down that aisle on her father's arm, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The church was packed. Friends, family, co-workers, people she barely knew but had to invite because that's what you did. All of them were watching her with smiles that felt too bright, too eager. Marcus stood at the altar waiting for her. Tall, handsome in his custom tuxedo, looking like every romance novel hero she had ever read about. They had been together for 3 years. He proposed on her birthday with a ring that cost more than her car. He promised her forever. She believed him. The ceremony began. The priest spoke words she had heard at a dozen other weddings, words about love and commitment, and 2 becoming 1. Jasmine felt like she was floating, like none of this was quite real. When it came time for the rings, Marcus took her hand. His palm was sweating. She noticed, but told herself it was nerves. Everyone got nervous on their wedding day. The priest handed him her ring. Marcus held it between his fingers, staring at it as he had never seen it before. The pause stretched. Jasmine could not breathe. The church erupted around her. Gasps and whispers and the sound of 300 people collectively inhaling shock. Phones appeared in hands like magic, cameras turning toward her, toward Marcus's retreating back, toward the altar where she stood alone in her mother's dress. She could not think, could not process. All she knew was that Marcus was leaving and she had to stop him. I had to fix this. I had to make him explain what was happening, because none of this made sense. Her feet moved before her brain caught up. She gathered up the heavy skirt of her dress and ran. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, too loud, too fast. People turned to watch her chase after the man who had just humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. She was almost to the doors when someone grabbed her wrist. The grip was firm but not painful, strong enough to stop her momentum completely. Jasmine spun around, ready to yank herself free, ready to scream at whoever was stopping her from getting to Marcus. But the words died in her throat. The man holding her wrist was tall, easily over 6 feet, Korean, with sharp features and dark eyes that held hers with an intensity that made her forget how to speak. He wore a black suit that fit him perfectly, expensive in a way that made Marcus's tuxedo look cheap by comparison. "Don't," the stranger said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos around them like a knife. "Don't chase him." "Let me go," Jasmine said, and her voice broke with words. She hated how weak she sounded, hated the tears that were already. Jasmine stared at the stranger's outstretched hand. This was insane. This man was insane. Everything about this moment defied logic and reason and every social norm she had ever learned. You did not just walk into someone else's wedding and take over. You did not stand at an altar with a woman you did not know and offer your hand like you had every right to be there. But something in his eyes stopped her from running. Something calm and certain and steady in a world that had just tilted completely off its axis. "Come here," he said, quietly, and his voice carried a weight that made her obey before she could think about it. Jasmine walked up the steps on shaking legs. Her bare feet, she had kicked off her heels somewhere during her attempted chase, were silent against the marble. When she reached him, she placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, rough with calluses that spoke of work, of use, of a life lived outside boardrooms and offices. His fingers closed around hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything about his appearance. He turned to face the church, keeping her hand firmly in his. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the building without him having to raise it. "I will marry her," he said. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. For a moment, no one reacted. The entire church seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if this was real or if they were all experiencing some kind of mass hallucination. Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs. This was not happening. This could not be happening. A stranger had just announced he was going to marry. The stranger's expression remained unchanged. There was no anger in his face, no aggression, no visible threat. But something in the way he stood, in the calm certainty radiating from him, made Marcus freeze halfway down the aisle. When the stranger spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried through the church with a weight that made everyone lean forward to hear. "You threw the ring at her," he said, his words precise and measured. "You announced to everyone here that you did not love her. You walked away. You made your choice." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Now I am making mine." Marcus's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jasmine watched him struggle to find words, watched him realize that whatever power he thought he had in this situation had just evaporated. "You don't understand," Marcus said, and his voice had lost all its earlier conviction. Now he just sounded desperate, pleading. "There are things you don't know, circumstances. I had to." "I suggest you leave," the stranger said, and though his tone remained polite, something in it made it very clear this was not a suggestion at all. "Now." Marcus looked at the stranger, then at Jasmine, then back at the stranger. Jasmine saw something flicker across his face, something that looked like fear. And then he turned and walked back down the aisle. This time he did not stop. He did not look back. He walked straight out of the church, and his groomsmen followed him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The doors slammed shut behind them, and the sound echoed through the sanctuary with a finality that made Jasmine's chest tighten. The stranger turned back to Jasmine. Min-jae's hand tightened around hers, just slightly. Then he turned to the priest. "Proceed," he said. The priest looked like he was going to have a heart attack. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he clutched the Bible to his chest like a shield. "I don't know if I can do this," the priest stammered. "This is highly irregular. I don't even know who you are. There are procedures, licenses, counseling requirements." Min-jae reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to the priest, who took it with trembling fingers. The priest opened the envelope. Inside was what looked like an official marriage license, already filled out and signed. The priest's eyes went wide as he read it, his mouth falling open in shock. "How did you—" the priest started to ask, but Min-jae cut him off. "Everything you need is there. Everything is legal. Everything is in order. All you have to do is perform the ceremony." The priest looked at Jasmine, his eyes searching her face as if looking for some sign that she was being coerced, that she needed help. Jasmine took a shaky breath and nodded. She did not know what she was agreeing to, did not know what would happen after this, but she knew she could not walk out of this church as the woman Marcus had abandoned. She would not give him that power over her. The priest swallowed hard and opened his Bible. His voice shook as he began to speak, rushing through the traditional words of the ceremony like he wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. Jasmine barely heard him. She was too focused on the man standing beside her, on the way he held her hand like it was something precious, on the way he stood between her and the rest of the church like a shield. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the congregation. Min-jae turned to face Jasmine fully. He released her hand and brought both of his hands up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her want to cry all over again. His thumbs brushed away the tears that were still sliding down her cheeks, and then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was a chaste kiss, respectful, tender, and somehow it felt more intimate than anything else could have been in that moment. When he pulled back, he looked down at her with those dark eyes and said quietly, so quietly that only she could hear, "You are safe now. I promise you that." Jasmine did not know why, but she believed him. Min-jae took her hand again and turned to face the church. The congregation was still sitting in stunned silence, still processing what had just happened. He did not smile at them, did not acknowledge their shock. He simply began to walk down the aisle, bringing Jasmine with him. She walked beside him on bare feet, her massive wedding dress rustling around her legs with every step, her hand gripped tightly in his. As they passed the pews, she saw faces she had known her entire life, staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to horror to poorly concealed fascination. She saw her mother reaching out toward her, tears streaming down her face, saw her father standing rigid and red-faced, looking like he wanted to grab Min-jae and demand answers. Saw her bridesmaids huddled together, their mouths hanging open, their eyes wide. And she saw the cameras, everywhere. Phones held high, pointed at her and Min-jae, recording every moment of this bizarre turn of events. Jasmine turned to look out the back window. People were spilling out of the church. She saw them standing on the steps, pointing at the car as it drove away. Saw her father pushing through the crowd, his mouth open as he shouted something she could not hear. Saw cameras flashing, phones held high to capture video of the car disappearing down the street. And then the church was behind them, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a white speck in the distance. And then it was gone entirely. Jasmine turned back around and pressed her hands to her face, Her whole body was shaking. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was starting to drain away, and in its place was a bone-deep exhaustion that made her want to curl up into a ball and never move again. She took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself down, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had just married a complete stranger, had just left her entire family and all of her friends standing in a church without any explanation, had just gotten into a car with a man she did not know and driven away to a destination she could not even begin to guess. "Where are we going?" she asked, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, high and thin and on the verge of breaking. Min-jae was sitting beside her, his hands resting on his knees, his posture relaxed despite the insanity of what had just occurred. He looked at her and his expression was calm and steady, exactly the same as it had been in the church. "Somewhere you can breathe," he said. "Somewhere no one will bother you for a while." Jasmine shook her head. The whole thing felt surreal. Jasmine looked out the window and saw that they were pulling up in front of a tall building, all glass and steel and modern architecture. The kind of building that screamed money and power and influence. The driver got out and opened the door for them. Min-jae stepped out first, then turned and offered Jasmine his hand. After a moment of hesitation, she took it. He helped her out of the car and she stood on the sidewalk in her wedding dress and bare feet, feeling completely out of place and utterly lost. Min-jae led her into the building through a lobby that was all marble and expensive-looking art. They walked to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. He swiped the card and the doors opened immediately. They stepped inside and he pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator began to rise, and Jasmine watched the numbers climb higher and higher until they reached the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into an apartment that was bigger than any place Jasmine had ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, all clean lines and neutral colors. Everything about the space screamed wealth and taste and a life that was completely foreign to her. Min-jae walked into the apartment and Jasmine followed, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. She felt like she was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. She could not tell which. A woman appeared from one of the side rooms, older, Korean, with her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She looked at Jasmine with surprise, her eyes widening as she took in the wedding dress and the tear-stained face. Then she looked at Min-jae and said something in Korean, her voice fast and concerned. Min-jae responded in the same language, his tone calm and reassuring. The woman nodded, still looking uncertain, and then she turned to Jasmine and gave her a small, tentative smile. "This is Mrs. Han," Min-jae said, switching back to English. "She manages my home. She will help you with anything you need." Mrs. Han stepped forward and gestured toward the hallway, clearly indicating that Jasmine should follow her. Jasmine looked at Min-jae, suddenly panicked at the thought of being separated from the only person in this entire situation who seemed to know what was going on. "Where is she taking me?" Jasmine asked. "To a room where you can change and rest. You have been through a great deal today. You need time to process." "And what are you going to do?" "I am going to make some calls. Some things need to be handled." When Jasmine woke up, the room was dark. For a moment, she had no idea where she was. The bed was too soft, the sheets too expensive, the ceiling too high. And then it all came rushing back. The wedding, Marcus, the stranger at the altar, Min-jae. She sat up slowly, her body aching like she had run a marathon. Through the window, she could see the city lights spread out below her like stars. She had no idea what time it was, had no idea how long she had been asleep. There was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," Jasmine said, her voice rough from crying and sleep. The door opened and Min-jae stepped inside. He had changed out of his suit and into dark pants and a simple shirt. He looked more human now, less like an untouchable force and more like an actual person. "You are awake," he said. "Are you hungry?" Jasmine realized she was starving. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. Breakfast, maybe? Everything before the ceremony felt like it had happened in another lifetime. "Yes," she said. "Mrs. Han prepared food," Min-jae said. "Come." She followed him out of the bedroom and into the main living space. The city stretched out beyond the windows, glittering and vast and indifferent to the chaos of her day. Mrs. Han had set out food on the dining table, Korean dishes that Jasmine did not recognize but that smelled incredible. She sat down and Min-jae sat across from her. They ate in silence for several minutes. Jasmine was too hungry to speak, and Min-jae seemed content to let her process in her own time. Finally, Jasmine set down her fork and looked at him. "I need answers," she said. "Real ones, not vague statements about helping me or knowing what humiliation feels like. I need to know who you are and why you did what you did." Min-jae set down his own fork and leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he just looked at her, as if weighing how much to tell her. "I told you my name," he said finally. "Min-jae Park. I am the head of an organization that operates in this city and several others." "What kind of organization?" "The kind that most people pretend does not exist," Min-jae said. "We handle things that need handling. We protect what needs protecting. We collect what needs collecting." Jasmine's blood ran cold. "You're talking about the Mafia?" Min-jae's expression did not change. "That is one word for it." "And Marcus?" Jasmine asked, though she already knew the answer, could feel it settling into her bones like ice. "Marcus borrowed money from people who work for me, a great deal of money. Money he promised to repay and then did not. Money he has been avoiding for 6 months. Jasmine felt like she could not breathe. How much? $250,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. She had known Marcus had debts. He had mentioned business investments that did not pan out, deals that fell through, but she had never imagined anything like this. "He was going to run," whispered Jasmine. "That's why he left me at the altar. He was going to disappear." "Yes," Min-jae said. "He planned to take the wedding gifts, the cash, everything he could carry, and vanish." Jasmine pressed her hands to her face. "And you stopped him." "I stopped him from running, and I gave you a choice, a way to walk out of that church with your dignity intact." "Why? Why would you care about my dignity?" Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had heard it yet. "Because I have a sister," he said. "And 3 years ago, a man did something similar to her. He humiliated her, destroyed her in front of everyone who mattered, and I was not there to stop it." His jaw tightened. "I could not help her then, but I could help you." Jasmine stared at him. Behind the calm, behind the control, she saw something raw, something human. "What happens now?" she whispered. Min-jae stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city, his hands in his pockets. "Now, Jasmine," he said, "we make Marcus regret every choice that brought him to this moment." He turned to look at her, and something in his eyes made her shiver. "And then we figure out what comes next for both of us." If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button because Jasmine's story is just getting started. What did you think? Should she trust Min-jae? What's Marcus going to do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want part 2, let me know. See you in the next one.